August 5th, 2020, regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees. Will you please stand and join the board in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, before we go into adoption of the agenda, which is item 1.03, it's come to my attention that the last three items on the agenda, the second reading of policy recommendations for adoption, were posted as information items rather than action items. So I'm going to ask for a motion to recharacterize those items, 10.01, 10.02, and 10.03 as action items.
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? In that case, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. So the agenda has been adopted. Now we vote on adopting the agenda as amended. So it is recommended that the agenda as adopted, or as amended, for the August 5th, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees be adopted as presented.
I move for the adoption of the agenda as amended.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda as presented. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right, takes us to comments and questions from the floor. Item 3.01, representatives of the PTA. Is there anyone from the PTA who wishes to address the board? If not, we'll move to item 3.02, representatives of school employees. Item 3.03, representatives of Mishawaka Education Foundation. Yes, Mrs. Spiker.
Thank you, President Curry, school board, I see, school board and guests. I'm here to represent the Mishawaka Education Foundation and to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing lately. The most recent event that we had was the Chip In for Education golf benefit, and that benefit was founded 3 years ago in order to support academic competitions for K through 12 Mishawaka students. So we're happy to say this was the third year. I want to thank Mr. Barker for being such a wonderful partner to the Mishawaka Education Foundation and all that we do, and especially the golf benefit that we just had. There are many people here that I'd like to thank. Our sponsors are one of them. St. Joseph Health System was once again our major sponsor. We have a very generous anonymous donor who has been wonderful to the Mishawaka Education Foundation and Mishawaka students for the past 3 years and longer. I also would like to thank President Curry for your support as sponsorship from Schindler, Olson, Curry, and Dendiu. As far as employees, there are so many of you here and so many that helped with the benefit. I want to thank you for that. We've got Mike Faulkner and Alex Newman were huge in helping to develop sponsorships for us. We had Jen Smith. She does the brochure every year and also does the general photos. Meg Sauer, Barb Michaelos, Kristen Hargis, Heather O'Laughlin, Lynn Howard, Heidi Peebles, Corey Laban, Sarah Hickel, Kyle Marsh, Tim Boyer, Sean Steinkellner. And I also want to thank the golf committee who helps put this together. Bill Pemberton sits on the committee along with Dean Hubbard, Roger Wright, Mike Triple, Phil Blasco, and Don Zimmerman Jr. So I want to thank the golf committee as well. I did mention it was our third year. This is the year of COVID, and so we knew that there would be a slight drop in not only participation but in sponsorships. Our first year, or last year rather, we had $45,000 that we earned, just actually more than that. We had 28 foursomes. This year we were down, and it was $39,335 that we were able to net this year. We had 20 foursomes. So in all, for the past 3 years with this event, we've raised over $132,000 for academic competitions. So we would like to see this continue, and we would like to see it grow. And now I'd like to introduce a video that was so beautifully done by our very own Parker Norris and Evan Bordner. I want to thank them for putting this together. And along with really Matt Rendell, Meg Sauer, and Dean Hubbard, who were instrumental in providing the internship that Parker and Evan benefited from and are now employees to create such wonderful videos for the school system. With that, Parker?
The weather was picture perfect, as the Morris Park Country Club became the setting for the Mishawaka Education Foundation's Chip In for Education golf outing. For students such as Troy Crooks, this fundraising event is important to make his involvement in academic teams possible.
We need to raise a lot of money to be able to compete in our season, and this is a huge thing, getting the people of our community involved in our high school, and a lot of people like to give back, and so just showing them today what we can do, and hopefully we can get some good sponsorships, and that really helps us during the school year.
Students not only gain extracurricular opportunities from academic teams, but they are also able to develop their skills and find a sense of belonging.
Kids are getting skills that won't only help them to pass a test or anything like that, but it can actually lead to future opportunities. And that's something about academic teams that I think is very important, is it never closes doors on anything, it only opens doors on things. So a lot of these skills that these kids are getting, whether it be technical or, like I said, social previously, these are things that are only going to help them in the future.
As an event, the Chip In for Education is a terrific showcase of individuals and organizations giving back to the community.
We really could not do this event without the sponsors. The golfers bring in a little bit of funds, but by the time we pay for all of the expenses that are associated with a golf benefit, there's not much left from the foursomes. These sponsors, it's direct money that is not being used for anything else other than to go to the Mishawaka Education Foundation to fund those academic competitions.
The total funds raised through the Chip In for Education in 2020, nearly $40,000, is on par with previous years and will make a big difference at Mishawaka schools.
To say it's a big event is an understatement. I don't think it can be overstated how important this is to our academic teams. We go against schools that have much larger populations, much larger tax bases, and therefore much larger capacity for resources. It helps us to get not only basic essentials, but the little extras that kind of put us up into a world-class style of competition, in my opinion.
Parker Norris, Mishawaka Network.
Thank you again. In closing, there are two other things that are going to be happening. Mishawaka Education Foundation puts together the School City of Mishawaka Payroll Deduction Program. That's going to begin next week. And then another thing that is happening is our Growing the Future, which is the largest event that we have for the Education Foundation. That will be held October the 15th. Here's hoping that we can have an in-person event, but COVID will dictate what happens there. So I'd like to remind you that auction items are going to be listed online, and so if you go to the Mishawaka Education Foundation, there is a link to those auction items. So bid early and often, please, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Ms.
Moving on.
Spiker, I just would like to thank you and your team at the Mishawaka Education Foundation. It was a great day. You ordered great weather for us, and I know everyone had a great time. And for us to make a profit of nearly $40,000 in these circumstances, I think speaks to the hard work of your group, and we thank you for the contributions that will make for our students. Our students will benefit from that day greatly by their participation in these academic competitions. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
There was one team that was a ringer, I would like to say, which we may want to watch next year.
Know nothing about that.
All right, on that note, we'll go to item 3.04, general public. Mr. Strawn, you signed up.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, superintendent, and ladies and gentlemen. This evening I have some agenda-specific and general questions. I'll get right to it. Item 6.01, roadmap to reopening plan update. 3 questions here. Question 1, how does School City plan to ensure the integrity of any online testing? Question 2, for students with no internet access at home, how does School City plan to provide internet access to those students? Question 3, how will School City handle either a COVID-19 exposure or a confirmed case of COVID with respect to the MHS football program? Item 9.01, recommendation to approve change order with R. Yoder Construction. 5 questions here. Question 1, why isn't the source of funds for this proposed change order not the original $13 million 2016 capital improvement bond account? Question 2, was there a contingency dollar reserve on the Yoder contract, and if so, what was that dollar amount? Question 3, the 8 change orders sum to a total of $167,749.02, or 7.8% of Yoder's initial bid price. If Yoder had initially bid $2,313,049.02 in lieu of the original bid of $2,145,300, would the $2,313,049.02 have displaced Yoder as the low bidder? Question 4, when this requirement was solicited, a pre-bid meeting was mandatory as a condition precedent for submitting a bid. How many entities attended this pre-bid meeting, and how many of those entities actually submitted a bid? Question 5, given the fact that attendance at the pre-bid meeting was required, where all attendees toured all School City buildings, allowing and encouraging potential bidders to ask questions and examining all existing site conditions, then why the large number of change orders on this contract? I had 2 general questions, which didn't get printed, but I can recall one. And this is probably directed at the superintendent. Has there been any discussion at the Indiana Department of Education with regards to the fall 2020 ADM count, and how are they going to maintain any semblance of accuracy in that count? If you could share what you know to date. I'm sure they're probably trying to figure it out in Indianapolis as well. So that concludes my remarks for this evening, Mr. President. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Mr. President, if I could, David,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a contractor, and I'm well aware of change orders, and there are times when change orders are driven by the building owner or the owner.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, I think a more fair question would be, of the 8 change orders, how many were really driven by School City of Mishawaka
Yeah.
that were outside the
Yeah.
scope of the original?
I would accept that as an additional question. Yes.
Okay.
Good point. Thank you.
Moving on to the consent agenda, item 4.01, approval of the minutes of the July 8, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees. It is recommended that the minutes of the July 8, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees be approved as presented. Item 4.02, approval of the minutes of the July 15, 2020 virtual special meeting of the Board of School Trustees. It is recommended that the minutes of the July 15, 2020 virtual special meeting of the Board of School Trustees be approved as presented. Item 4.03, approval of bill warrants and payroll. It is recommended that the bill warrants and payroll in the amount of $6,936,504.20 be approved for payment from the appropriate funds. Item 4.04, approval of financial report. It is recommended that the board approve the June 2020 financial report as presented. Item 4.05, approval of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. That takes us into the Vision Initiative section of the agenda. Item 5.01, Roadmap to Reopening, Plan Update Number 4. Mr. Barker, Mr. Huppert, Ms. Hickle, and Ms. Miklos.
Thank you, President Curry, and members of the board. Just to answer Mr. Strawn's question regarding the ADM, the procedure this year will work much like it has in the past. It's probably the third Friday in September. There will be 2 count days again this year, and our revenue for the first semester will be driven from the ADM count day in September, and then the second count day will drive our revenue for the second semester. So the process will work the same. Our enrolled students will count toward that ADM, and we will be funded based upon the enrollment that we have on that day. It's a good question because it relates to, us starting now virtually, but in the eyes of the IDOE, we are the same as if we would be in person. As you know, also at our last school board meeting, we made the decision to start the 2020-2021 school year in a completely virtual learning environment for the first 6 weeks at minimum, as was recommended to us from the St. Joe County Department of Health. And as you also know, the St. Joe County Department of Health endorsed us to continue with athletics at this time, and we'll continue to follow the guidance from the health department. I've been in conversations this week with Dr. Fox from the health department to talk about our plan for fall athletics, and we've asked Mr. Huppert, our director of athletics, to be here tonight to present that plan to you. So Mr. Huppert, if you could start for us tonight, we appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Barker, and thank you for having me, President Curry and School Board. Tonight we're going to present a pamphlet and some information about Be Smart, Be Safe, and Be Caveman Ready. Our stadium was built in 1939, and this is unprecedented. We're always trying to get fans into the stadium, not try to figure out how to limit our fans. And we have a safe, productive, memorable environment and plan. To quote former IHSAA Commissioner Bobby Cox, kids need sports. They need sports. Our plan is for football, band, cheer, dance, and families to have a memorable and a very positive, safe environment. And as Mr. Barker mentioned, he's talked with Dr. Fox at the St. Joe County Health Department, and we are approved at the number of 17% capacity. Now, the number we're looking at is 1,318 people at the Mishawaka football games at Steele Stadium. Page 2 has a map that has the amount of seats we'll use in each section, where restrooms, concession, home students will be. Using hometown tickets, we're planning on having online sales. We will communicate the process of buying tickets on social media and cavemansports.com. Our ticket takers are going to scan tickets with iPads and plexiglass shields to protect them. Fans will be limited to the section that they are assigned when ordering tickets. And if you see on the map, it has in each section how many fans would be permitted in those sections. We have the first 2 rows and the aisle seats. Those will be unavailable. We want people to be able to travel to and from their seats safely. We've cut out season passes for the time being so we can have an accurate count of attendance. We're increasing restrooms with porta-johns outside the north end zone of the stadium, and restroom lines and concessions will have ground markings for social distancing. We are going to use the restrooms on the home and visitor sides in the tunnel. We will not use the home side concessions because space is not wide enough, and when we're using the restrooms on the home side with the locker rooms, that's a smaller tunnel, and so we want to be able to travel safely to and from those restrooms. We're increasing our entries by using all 4 gates. It's been a number of years since we've done that, and we'll have a challenge with Wi-Fi, but our ticket manager, Wendy Melton, has been working on a process with MiFi that increases the Wi-Fi capability so they can use those scanners. There will be ushers directing fans to the proper gates, so we don't have a line outside of Alumni Plaza, just one gate. We're going to have markings on the sidewalks helping people to social distance. We're going to increase our space for concessions by moving home concessions on the track on the north side. So people could actually use the concession table and then line up along the track, and they can space themselves out with social distancing. Concessions will be bottled water or Powerades or wrapped. If we had hot dogs or popcorn, those would be containers and they wouldn't be open. And we wouldn't have any packets. We would not have any condiment pumps. We would have packets that you would put inside the hot dog so you're not reaching into those. We're increasing the exit points. We would use the use of the tunnel exit in the middle of the home side, so we would actually have 5 places for people to leave. We're requiring face coverings upon entry with the expectations of wearing those masks in the facility, and that's the expectation of the St. Joe County Health Department. We're reducing the number of players on the sideline in uniform. We'll be communicating through announcement signs and video boards of social distancing. The game broadcast live, it's going to be on pay-per-view of $9.99 on ihsaaatv.org. Now that's a difference of what we've been doing in the past with a free broadcast in YouTube, but we feel with the lesser attendance that this is a way that we can have some revenue. And Matt Rendell's been working for the past month with the IHSAA TV. And there's also an opportunity there where people can get an archived video of that game. And that's something that's never been able to happen before. So those memories would be able to be archived. Press box will be limited with social distancing. Windows will be open and plexiglass will be used for the announcer and radio voices. Some media or stats personnel may be put outside. Cleaning crews will wear PPE and ensure trash containers are emptied and restrooms are clean. The hospitality room, it's been eliminated. We don't want to have any buffet-style food. Future Caveman program has been suspended for now. Future Cavemen, they want to be up close and personal with our players and slapping high fives, passing out T-shirts. So at this time, we're going to suspend that program. We will not have vendor tables or the tent in Alumni Plaza. The priority is to avoid lines and contact and avoid gatherings. There will be no pregame cheer with athletes in the stand. The band has been moved to the south end zone to allow for more seating in the bleachers, and we appreciate the cooperation of Mr. Chamberlain and the band to say we want to help you guys so we can move down there and they can spread out in the end zone. Locker rooms will be limited with the IHSAA parameters. Right now we're in phase 2 and that's 50% capacity. We expect by that time we would be in phase 3, but we still don't think we'll be at full capacity in the locker room. So we're talking with our football coaches about how they're going to gather before the game. That could be on the field. And we'll communicate with the other schools' athletic departments to talk to their football teams about where they can be with our small visitors locker room. Players are going to ask to shower at home. We don't want to use our showers at this time. And we feel with our broadcast on the Mishawaka Network, doing that online, our tickets online, our radio broadcast on 96.1 FM, we're in really good position, especially with our hardworking staff, that we can execute this plan. So tonight we're going to be asking for your approval of the number of the capacity. And we've worked hand in hand with Mr. Barker, with Mr. Faulkner, with Mr. Ross. We talked to Corey Laban and Mr. Caldroni. And I'd like to thank Sherry Kaiser and Julie Fassett. They've had amazing ideas. They brought fresh ideas to the table. When we put numbers down, they're looking at it from a different angle. And also Bruce Quick, our Mishawaka marketing sports marketing specialist, he's put in numerous hours on this project as well. So after tonight, we'll contact sponsors. We had one sponsor contact us this morning, and we met with them along with the MEF. And River Valley Construction told us, with this plan, we're all in, and they still want to be one of our major sponsors on the board, help us out, be a sponsor, and they talked to us about being on the pay-per-view, being on the video board, and how they can message. So we appreciate them helping us out. So when it's time, I'd be happy to answer any questions that we have, but I think we're going to progress with the other reopening phases.
Yes, but if anyone has any questions
this is the
specific,
time.
we can
Okay.
do it now.
So, tell me how do you decide the ticket sales as far as who gets tickets? Let's say varsity team,
Sure.
obviously. If you're a senior varsity player, having parents there, how are you deciding that? And how many tickets are the participants getting?
We do have a breakdown of the tickets, and we were going to present a breakdown of the essential tickets to you this evening. There's one model that has the parents of football players getting 2 tickets, and that would turn out to be 148 with 74 players in uniform. That would also be with 28 for our varsity coaches. But we're not sure that that's enough for those because it would be 2 tickets per family, and that would be a mom and a dad, not their kids. So when Julie and Sherry and I talked about it today, we said, we don't want to cap that. We would like to get the number of 1,318 of our 17% capacity, and then work with Mr. Barker and Mr. Calderoni on those numbers. We would like to give our varsity football players 4 tickets and give the coaches 50 tickets so we can make sure that Mr. Kinder doesn't have just 2 tickets, he can get his family in. We would also like to think that we're not just talking about our football team, we're talking about our band. And so when we're talking about our band members, flags, and dancers, Mr. Chamberlain said that he would need 252 if we had 2 tickets. Well, you multiply that by 2 and it's 504. We think that's fair. It's a presentation that they're looking forward to. Our band this year is not going to contests. They're working towards Friday nights, and they want to be there just like the football team on Friday nights. So we think it's fair that our football team gets either 2 or 4 tickets, our band either gets 2 or 4 tickets, and let's not forget about our cheerleaders. We want to make sure that they're covered. And Coach Molesky said that they have 33, so they would need 66. So if we're going to multiply that, that would be 132. We have 148 tickets for Mishawaka staff. Of course, we have members here, administration. We're going to have people who are teachers who have a +1 that we would account for, and we feel like we have a number there. We have visiting staff where we would have 40 tickets. That would be 20, and they would have a +1. And then we're looking at Mishawaka students, visiting students, and possibly general admission. So if we start with the numbers that we were talking with let's call varsity football, varsity cheer, and band. If we looked at that and said, all of you get 4 tickets, we would end up with 1,315 tickets. Okay, our capacity is 1,318. So if all those people say, yes, we have to have tickets, and they're going to use all 4, then we would have to eliminate students, we would have to eliminate visitors, and we don't think that everybody's going to say, yes, we're going to need 4 tickets.
But I think it's important that we project that our priority are the players and their parents and the students and the staff.
Sure.
So that the people in the community are aware of that.
And
I think that's fair.
Understand that our community is based on 60% are divorced families. So they have 4 parents or 3 parents or there's multiple parents. And you're not going to get a community like Mishawaka to have that conversation that dad gets to go this week and mom isn't, right? And so I think it's important that the varsity football is a big deal. If you've made the varsity team, it's a big deal, right? So those dudes get priority. Senior band members get priority. This is their last year to play in the high school band, right? The senior cheerleaders get priority. So I think that we have to base it on your seniority of who you are and where you are in the lineup. Freshman and JV football isn't going to bring the crowd that a varsity football game brings, right? So we don't have to, per se, limit or manipulate things. And I think that people who aren't going to bring 4 people are going to be happy to say, I don't need my tickets, or nobody's coming, or whatever, right? But I think varsity, if you've made the varsity team, you're owed your family. And if you have 2 sets of parents, you don't get to pick and choose. Coaching staff, I think they put so much time and energy into the program that, Matt's giving me the eye, that we don't limit on that their wives get to see them or their kids get to see them or that kind of thing. But the senior cheerleaders and the senior band members, I think they get priority over the whole group. So I'm happy to hear that you're saying that you're considering and you're trying to work that plan out. I have faith in you. You seem to have done, and your staff has done a good job putting this proposal together. I want to see it that the right people are sitting in the stadium, not just seat fillers.
Well, and I would, and I'm going to be selfish here, and I'm going to say that I feel that if there are any openings, the students should have priority over the board.
Absolutely.
Or other staff. And if there are any openings, I think the priority ought to go to the students.
Yeah.
And that's one point that we brought up today is memories. And
Yeah.
we want our parents to be there, we want our students to be there, and we want it to be a memorable moment. We had in here 42 seats for freshmen and JV players because they're out there practicing, they're working hard, they're doing everything they can. And Sherry brought up this afternoon, she said, why can't we have them in their jerseys on the track behind the team? That frees up 42 seats.
Absolutely.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
And so we just freed up 42 seats from 2 o'clock this afternoon until 3 o'clock. And that's when we had the conversation about some other things. And it was in your packet. We took it out. We said, we have an essential breakdown here, but it's not what we want. And so we don't want to put that out. The other thing we want to do is talk to Hometown Ticketing and ask them about, can we start a process on Saturday and work Saturday, Sunday with maybe it's the senior parents, maybe it's the parents, and then open it up to students on Monday and Tuesday. There's a number of ways they can do it. We don't want to have reserved seats in every seat, but we do want to have people in sections. It's very important for us to have reserved numbers. So if we have 1,318 that we are promising the St. Joe County Health Department, each person needs to check in. So everybody's going to be accounted for. So our gold passes, the people with reserved seats, they need to check in, and so we're going to have to figure those things out. But I think you're wise. I think you're wise, and not to cut you off, but I think you're very wise to say, if our coach communicates that and says, hey, you have the availability to get 4 tickets, if you only have 2 in your family, just use 2, because those other 2 will go to students. Those other 2 will go to other people. And I think Coach Kinder will communicate that, and our players and families will do that. I don't think they're going to take 2 tickets and then say, hey, my neighbor, I got 4, you want to come in? That's not what we're going to do. We're looking at a capacity of 17%. A local university right now's plan, preliminary, is to do about 25%. The Elkhart County Schools are taking a proposal today, and I haven't heard the outcome. They're trying to get 25%. We had a model that said 50% that started. We have a model that says 75%. It's not even close to what we want. When we look at it with the social distancing of being safe, we think 17%, and the St. Joe County Health Department and Dr. Fox agree with Mr. Barker that this is a safe plan. So we can come back to you guys with the essential numbers. We didn't want to give it to you wrong tonight. We wanted to make sure that we had the percentage right to make sure that you felt that was safe. And if you don't, we'll take it back and we'll redo those numbers. And if we need to do something 2 nights before the game to make it right, we want it to be safe. We want it to be high school football, and we want it to be Mishawaka football, and we want it to be memorable.
How many home games do we have?
We have 4 in the regular season and hopefully 3 or 4 in the playoffs.
And then when will you communicate the rules and stipulations for the away games?
Once we vet, and I think we would be able to have our students and I think we'll be able to have our essential numbers pretty close to what we want by the end of the week.
Okay.
And we meet with the Northern Lakes Conference athletic directors every Friday, and we'll have an idea of what their plan is. One of our local schools said that they're going to have 25% for visiting fans. Where we had it right now, it was about 10%. But we also have a bigger stadium, and so we need to see what their numbers are. We want to be fair. But like you said, we don't want to cut out our students because we're going to give, the number I had in here was 185 for the visiting football program. That would be for their administrators, for the parents of their players. I think we need to be fair to their parents that they want to see some memories too, and also for their students. And we only had about 45 in their students. We took out a student section. We did have a student section for the visitors, and we took that out this afternoon and said, you know what, we're going to give fans, administrators, but we don't know if it's fair for us to say, if we give you 180 tickets, you have to use them for your fans, you have to use, why don't we give our visitors this many tickets and say this is what you can do with them, and then just like us, we can decide what we're going to do and they can decide what they're going to do. We would expect when we go to Northwood that they're going to say, you have this many tickets. We'll sit down with Coach Kinder and say, this is what we have to work with, and how do we make that work?
I'm glad to hear that you're listening to the staff, that you're listening to the football coach, that you're listening to the cheerleaders. I think it's only fair that you hear them out, and I'm glad that you communicated with them, and I'm glad that you guys worked out a plan, and I'm glad that it was tweakable, to say the least, right? And everybody wants to go watch football. Everybody wants to go watch football. It's the only thing to do in Mishawaka on Fridays. So the fact that we're limited now and that we have to negotiate and steal one to pay someone else,
Sure.
whatever, I
I'm happy that this is the plan that you put in place, and I'm happy that Julian and Sherry did it and that you guys communicated and collaborated together. So I think it's very well done.
So the plan will be to basically pre-sale those tickets, see what we have available on the date in which those pre-sales end, and then see what we would have available to make public for general admission after we've worked through all those priorities that you listed. But we feel the same way. We want to prioritize the students who are involved in the event so that they and their families can experience those events. And I too want to thank Mr. Huppert and Mrs. Kaiser and Mrs. Facette for their work. We spent a lot of time together over the last week looking through all of this. And quite honestly, our plan will probably allow for more fans than many people because of the size of our stadium. We're blessed that way at least, but we are required by the health department to maintain social distancing. So as you look at that, you'll see those pods. Those will be marked for seats for people to sit in. So if people order 1 ticket or 2 tickets or 4 tickets, there will be pods of those available that they'll be able to see and then go to. And by offering pre-sale tickets, the plan is to be able to move people quickly from outside to inside. We will not be dealing with cash or any of that stuff. People will come through, show their ticket, and walk on into their seat. So, Mr. Pemberton?
I wonder if, as I look at the diagram, whether we can set up some chairs in the north end zone, possibly on the track on the east and west, that would allow social distancing and at the same time increase your ability to offer more tickets.
We could look at that. The issue is we'll have the travel.
I understand.
And then we'll also have the concessions and restrooms. But in the width of the track, there may still be room there. I'm not sure
but
what
if you could increase, I mean, if instead of 1,300 go up another 10%,
Right.
It's 130
Right.
people that would be able to attend. And I mean, if you go to a Mishawaka football game, typically our side of the stadium is packed.
Right.
So I mean, there's a lot of people that want to go.
Right.
It's
Yep.
limited, but
But I think you can do it in a controlled manner that gives you the ability to expand this a little bit.
Right.
Might need a little bit more work, but
We can take a look at that and look at the travel distances that we need.
Right.
And see if the width of the track enables that. But I think we also, I'm not sure if the IHSA came out with any guidance today. I was told they were going to, it may be tomorrow, regarding fall sports, so we'll have to also consider that. There's definitely some rules that they've already laid out on who are essential on the sidelines and all of that, but I agree that's far enough away. We should have some room to maybe do something with, depending upon how the concessions and that work. So we can take a look at that, Mr. Huppert, and see.
And we did have the idea of having our students in the end zone, but as soon as you say they can be there, they come together. So your key there is to make sure that they have distance. And we did a great job with Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Calderoni and Mr. Laban for graduation mapping out, and Mr. Ross had it down to the seat of where people could be, and that helped us greatly with this. It's hard to see from the map that you have, but we do have where it says 88. Those are individual single seats for students, and then there are groups of 2 and groups of 4, so the bigger ones are groups of 4. So we have the ability to move things around if we need to, and those would be marked with vinyl. We've talked about tape, but we don't want to have tape that sticks under the sun, and then we're working through all those things as well.
We could work towards roping certain areas off to give you avenues for people to move.
Right.
And I think there's some things you can look at that might give you the ability to expand this. I can't believe we can't do it.
Right. We're looking at the same thing for under the stadium for when people need to go to the restrooms. The doors will be open. We'll have one-way traffic and all of that. So, but we can look at that in the end zones as well to see if there's some capacity there we can gain. Anything else from Mr. Huppert before we move on to the next phase of the reopening? All right. Thank you, Mr. Huppert.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
At our last meeting, we did make that decision for virtual learning, and there's been a lot of discussion in the community about what virtual learning looks like and and how that impacts different programs for exceptional learners or preschool. And so tonight, we've asked Ms. Hickel and Mrs. Michaelis to be here to talk about those things and how they impact those things. So up first will be Ms. Hickel, who will talk about the virtual learning environment that we are expecting to put students into starting next week. And we will address tonight, just so you know, if you've heard questions or comments about, we've talked a lot about live virtual learning, and we're excited about that. Our teachers have worked incredibly hard this week. Our curriculum instruction team has put together some great professional development for them, and I've sat in on some of those meetings, and we've received a lot of positive feedback from teachers this week. I have individually and through those meetings and in the chat boxes that we've had in those meetings. But I feel good about what we're doing. But I'll also tell you, I sat in on a meeting with about 40 superintendents today from 7 to 8 a.m., and it was maybe the most depressing thing ever as we all try to navigate to the start of the school year. And everybody's feeling it. And our teachers are not any different. Our students and families are not any different. So we're trying to communicate what this is. Part of that is in what we're trying to do tonight to make public that plan for live virtual learning, but also to let our families know that we have a plan for those families where live virtual learning won't work, depending upon their work life and what those schedules may be. And we will meet those families where they are, and our teachers are already aware through the professional development that they've been provided that there's a plan for students in those situations. So, Ms. Hickel.
Thank you. President Curry, members of the board, Mr. Barker, guests, we appreciate your time tonight to be able to expand upon our virtual learning plan. As Mr. Barker indicated, we know there are still a lot of questions out there, and we hope to answer many of those tonight. With virtual learning live, we have recently messaged to families and will continue to message to families the differences between live virtual learning and remote learning and our intentionality in moving in that direction. So as many of you know, when we were out in the spring with remote learning, that plan was created in a short period of time. At that time, we were not one-to-one. We had yet to do e-learning. And so that plan was very much reactive. And while we're proud of that work, and we're proud of what our teachers were able to do to support students and families at that time, we also know that we need to improve upon that. And we know that there is a significant amount of work that we can do and that we have been doing to improve that. And we believe that moving towards virtual live instruction are the improvements that are necessary. With virtual live learning, one of the primary benefits of live instruction, why we would want our teachers to be conducting virtual live learning, is that it does allow the teacher to be the one leading and guiding and supporting the child through the instructional day. Even for working families, live virtual learning is still the best option that creates the least amount of pressure on families to support learning. So one thing that we heard loud and clear during remote learning is it was challenging for families to be the primary instructor for their students. And so we want to move that responsibility back to teachers. Just as they entrust us with their children when we're in person, we're asking that they entrust us with their children virtually in the virtual setting with virtual learning. For those families, as Mr. Barker indicated, that are not able to participate live, there are ways in which we can and will support families in a virtual self-paced setting. There will be accessible instructional materials, and there will be self-directed materials available to students so that they can keep in pace with their peers and in pace with the learning that takes place in that live setting, and they're still able to meet those deadlines. I think one thing that is important, because this is so new to our families, our students, and even our staff, is to understand how this looks different, why it looks different, and why it is best. So if you will give me just a few minutes, I think one of the best ways that I can explain it is through an analogy. So if you'd be patient with me. When I think about why we want our students and our teachers to engage in live virtual learning, two recent experiences come to mind for me. One is thinking about it from the teacher perspective. So I have my oldest, who is recently staying home more on his own, and he has explored the world of cooking food for himself for the first time. So as parents know, this is frightening. The very first time that I wanted him to put something in the oven so that by the time I got home, it was prepared and we could eat at a somewhat reasonable time, I called him
And I explained that there were directions on the counter that walked him through exactly how to turn the oven on, how to put the meatloaf in the oven, and what he should do. You can imagine my surprise and disappointment in myself for thinking that would work when I came home to a raw meatloaf in the oven. That is very much what that remote learning experience feels like. For teachers, it's to write out every direction and to anticipate every need that a student may have or every point of confusion, and to try and get that all out without having that student there to engage with you. So using that same analogy, the second time I got smarter with my oldest, and I thought, I'm going to call him on the phone. So I called him and I walked him through the directions of how he could prepare something on the stove. Mostly went well. When I got home, I had said, use a pot. I didn't explain that I didn't mean the gigantic pot that he found. I didn't explain what it meant to remove it from the heat. So while whatever he created was mostly edible, there were certainly still some flaws in that plan. By the third time, I finally figured out that if I FaceTimed him and I could see what he was doing in person, he could ask me questions and show me what he was trying to do, that I was better able to support him, and he successfully made something in the Instapot. So proud of that young man. My point of this very lengthy analogy is that is the experience for our teachers. They are best able to support their students when they are in person with them, whether that means in person on a device or in person in our buildings. They have that ability to answer questions, to see where a student is lost, and to redirect them. When they don't have that accessibility, we're left to things that are much more like my written note on the counter and my raw meatloaf, and that is certainly not what we want. When you think about it from the student perspective, which is even more profound, what that feels like to be alone and guiding your own instruction, I think about a recent poor choice I made where I decided that I should remodel my own kitchen on my own. Another analogy for you here. And I had never done electrical before, but I thought, certainly I can figure this out. And so I Googled how to do some electrical work. I had the general idea of what I needed to do, but I thought maybe not best at that point in time to start rewiring my outlets. So I watched a YouTube video. So I have now improved from those directions to I'm going to see it, at least in person. Felt pretty confident about that. I knew how to turn the power off. I knew how to check to see if it was hot. And I had a pretty good idea how to rewire the outlets. Until I hit that first outlet that was a three-way switch, and it was so old that it didn't have 3 poles, and I couldn't figure out why it didn't look like the video I had seen. In that same way, I was desperate, and I FaceTimed a friend that is an electrician. And he could look at what I was seeing, and he could tell me why I couldn't find the ground wire, and he could tell me why it looked different, and he could watch me rewire it so that when I turned the power back on, I did not electrocute myself. In that same way, from a teacher's to a student's perspective, again, being so alone and not having that two-way communication and dialogue is not what we think is best for students. So to the best of our ability, when we want to provide those experiences that are much more like my ability to FaceTime. I apologize for that lengthy example, but many of our families are out there struggling to understand, why are you asking me to participate in live instruction? And so as much as we can help our families to understand that if they can get their student to us in the virtual world, just get them logged on, open the computer, that from that point on, our teachers can and will support their students so that they're not left doing all of that work on their own in their homes in the nights and the weekends. I certainly had an experience that many parents did where I was supporting my 4 children during remote learning, and I was using every waking minute on the nights and the weekends to help them. We don't want that for our families. We don't want that for our students. So we think that live virtual instruction is the best way to support our families if they are able to participate. You may have seen on social media, and I may or may not be able to get you to the video. Thank you. This video that was created by the Mishawaka Network, we had the privilege to be able to pilot live virtual instruction in our summer school programming this year so that we could learn from our mistakes, we could figure out how to best do it, and we were incredibly lucky to be blessed with teachers and families and students who were very patient with us as we worked through those kinks. The Mishawaka Network created this wonderful video that I really do think speaks to that family experience the student experience and the teacher experience. Many of these families came in very hesitant. What will this look like? What will it feel like? And they left very happy with the outcome.
School City of Mishawaka students will begin this upcoming school year doing live virtual learning. This summer, SCM students and staff were piloting this type of learning environment and making it clear that it is not like the end of last school year.
Remote learning was kind of what they had to do in that situation. And now virtual is almost completely different, I think. More contact with the teacher.
Spring, when we went remote learning, not having equity in devices or access was really big, and so it was very low level. Students have their own devices. They have access to a live teacher all the time. Try to incorporate components of the regular school day so that it feels like normal, still developing strong relationships with kids. And it's something that's really been important to lead us into the fall.
While this is a big shift in teaching and learning, the interactions between students and teachers are vital to the learning process. Summer school teacher Claire Johnson saw firsthand how important the live teaching is.
I forgot how much I miss this and how great it is just to be, live and one-to-one with a student. It's awesome. So, it's effective this way that we're doing it. I feel like these students are learning, they're having fun.
But for a lot of parents, the concern is what it will actually look like. Principal Ben DeMoncas was able to tell us how it looked this summer.
Teachers will kind of give an assignment, and maybe you tune out for a little bit, and a teacher might go one-on-one with a couple students on the side, but it's back and forth. It's not something that you have to send an email, wait for something. It can be live in that I give you a lesson. Once I've kind of given the lesson, you might have some work time, and then if somebody needs help, then they can raise their hand or unmute themselves, and really provides immediate feedback, which is really important.
And parents see how valuable the live component is.
It's been really good. My kindergartner, she was a kindergartner last year, and she really missed seeing her teacher, classmates, that sort of thing. So doing the virtual live this summer has been really good for her. And same for my now 5th grader. Seeing kids his age and interacting with them and seeing a teacher, because I did not cut it, So it's been really good for both of them.
While this is not a normal learning experience, having the live component in teaching is so critical.
We're all in it for the kids, and I think providing them that interaction is really, really important, both for School City and LaSalle.
Yeah, it's okay to be nervous. It's different. It's different from what all of us, when we were students. It's extremely different from what we're all used to, but it works, and it's been super fun.
Evan Bordner, Mishawaka Network. School City of Mishawaka students will begin this upcoming school year doing live virtual learning.
Hopefully that helps you to see how the experience in summer school set us up to support our teachers and our students and move them in the direction of live virtual learning. Bruce, can you get me back into present mode? Sorry. Thanks. So we've now been working with our staff this week to introduce them to the instructional model and to support them in preparing for live virtual instruction. With our staff this week, we've been asking them to think about what are best practices in quality instruction in person. And as they think about those things, you can see a Wordle that they created of the things that they valued in live in-person instruction. Those same crucial elements to quality instruction are the essential elements of virtual live instruction. They may look different. We may have to be more intentional in how we make sure that those things are embedded, but it is still focused on relationships, peer-to-peer relationships, relationships between the staff and the students. The essential nature of routines and procedures to support students in being successful are even more important in a virtual setting, thinking about consistencies and structures. The idea of student engagement, if we're going to be successful in student learning, they have to be engaged and connected into what we're doing. So those same things transcend into the virtual learning environment. Thinking about what virtual live learning looks like for students, many families are asking themselves what that experience will be like. I'm going to start with elementary. So thinking about the elementary schedule, Their virtual live learning experience is scheduled from 8:45 until 2 p.m. with the exception of our kindergartners and our first graders who have a slightly shortened day, thinking about their ability to sustain that environment. But when you think about that time, please understand that there are large breaks embedded in between instructional blocks. There are a longer period of time for lunch. As the video mentioned, there is also, it is not being engaged on that computer with the teacher talking at you for the entirety of that time, but rather it is the teachers being there and being accessible and available for students. So much as they break their time up in an in-person setting between direct instruction, a student working independently and practicing or applying information, they do so in a virtual environment. The middle school day goes from 8:40 to 2:40, and the high school day from 8 to 3:10. They have the ability then to complete additional independent work assignments and complete assessments on specified due dates, and that is expected of them. High school grades and course credits are awarded in the same fashion that they are with live in-person credits. And all of our students will utilize the Canvas learning management system to be able to facilitate their communication between their teacher, as well as engaging with instruction, assignments, and assessments. Finally, the expectations for our parents and our guardians. Just as much as we need our parents and guardians to be collaborators with us in in-person instruction, we need them to be collaborators with us in a virtual setting. So our expectations for families are that they will be able to utilize Canvas and Skyward with the necessary supports that we provide, that they are able to refer to the SCM website for any additional resources and supports, that they are able to set aside a calm environment for their student to learn in and support their child in having that environment, that they can ensure that virtual learning equipment is available and charged, meaning their SCM-issued device, monitoring their child's academic progress in the same way that they do throughout the year, which is communicating with teachers, checking grades on Skyward, being accessible, maintaining open lines of communication and checking email frequently, as teachers will be communicating with families in that way. The supports that we have in place to make sure that our students and our families are supported and that they feel that they can be successful. There's a tiered system of supports, so we've tried to provide supports in as many different ways from as many different people as we possibly can, including teachers, tech assistants at the building level, their building principals, their online resources. We have a help desk and a helpline, continuing to put information and resources on our SCM website. And finally, for those students and families who do not have access to Wi-Fi, we are entering into an agreement with Comcast to be able to sponsor internet for eligible families. And the system we'll use is the Comcast Internet Essentials Program. The eligibility for that program includes that the service is available at their home, so that Comcast can run services to their home, that they have eligibility of public assistance programs with us, and that they are not a current Comcast Internet subscriber. And for those families that meet those requirements and do not have access to Wi-Fi, we will be able to support Wi-Fi for them so that their students can be successful. Bruce, can you advance that one for me? Sorry. Just very quickly thinking about the digital environment that students engage in, just letting all of our stakeholders understand that our major objectives and the things we want to focus on are engaging students in a positive way that's both academically and social emotionally focused, continuing their education in their process of learning, and then finally for our students and staff to understand that the objective during this 6 weeks is to learn and grow together. It is a continuous improvement process. Mr. Barker spoke at our last meeting about the ability to extend each other grace and to extend ourselves grace. We are already seeing so many exceptional things from our staff in preparation for students joining us on the 12th. I've given some examples up there. So many of our teachers are creating these digital classrooms and replicating what their in-person classroom looks like in a digital world with these Bitmoji classrooms. And it is not just our elementary teachers, our secondary teachers are diving into it too. So in the same way that in an elementary classroom I could go take a book off a bookshelf, I can access digital books from a digital bookshelf. In the same way that I may have my own individual little cubby where my materials are, I can have my own individual little cubby in a digital world. What our teachers are doing is absolutely astonishing. Building out their Canvas courses in ways that are easily accessible to students, that students know where to find materials and how to access those materials. They have been working so hard in preparation, and they're so excited to greet their students on the 12th, even if it's in a virtual environment. So thinking about that elementary day that I spoke about, just understanding that it is a shortened instructional day, and again, even though it spans the amount of time of 4 hours, that it isn't 4 hours of a student being engaged, listening to a teacher talk, that in the same way we have those best practices with in-person learning. You can see that time is broken up between morning meeting, which is really focused on our social emotional learning and support for our students. You have math and ELA blocks. We still value science and social studies. They still have access to their specials, which will also be taught in a live setting, with the exception of our younger students to be able to shorten their day. And then finally, that idea of having the ability to be able to serve each student where they're at. One advantage of the virtual setting is we can expand our remediation and enrichment opportunities for students. So being able to have students work one-on-one with a teacher, we have more time in our schedule for that here in a virtual setting. Being able to pull small groups, being able to dedicate different staff members to helping with the remediation and intervention process so that we can really close the learning gaps that we've identified from the spring. The middle school and the high school day you'll see on these two slides closely tries to echo the sequencing that they would experience in person, so that when we do transition back to in-person instruction, they're used to that same sequencing, but it also has shortened instructional blocks. The middle school will move to a block schedule where they go to 4 classes per day, and that includes their core and their elective classes. So much like the high school goes between maroon and white days, the middle school will go between maroon and navy days, so that they only focus on those classes at that time. We've been able to embed advisory, which is where the social emotional learning and that individual support and guidance of a teacher takes place, as well as what we're calling Jaguar focus time, which is much like the elementary situation where we're providing interventions and remediation targeted supports towards students to ensure that they're successful. And then finally, teachers have office hours where they're accessible for parents and communication. High school day echoes much of that with 4 shortened instructional blocks, and they'll keep to their block schedule, rotating between maroon and white days. They also have a daily built-in advisory where on Wednesdays, much like they do at the high school, they'll focus on social emotional learning. Again, we'll have the opportunity for individualized and one-on-one time with students through the RTI process, which is something that is very challenging in a secondary schedule. And they will also have daily office hours where they're accessible to parents and families and students for responding to communication. One thing that we're really focused on with the staff is celebrating those small wins. While we certainly measure our success based on learning outcomes, we're also measuring our success daily. So we're asking our teachers to think about the simple things. Did you and your students smile today? Did you laugh today? Were you able to engage one-on-one with a student and individualize and personalize that experience? So counting those small victories as we work towards the larger victories and learning outcomes. Something that I know staff are really concerned about with being able to control the learning environment for students is student engagement. So we're working through our professional learning with teachers on how to best engage students, and we're offering additional professional learning for high yield engagement strategies in a virtual setting that we piloted this summer and found great success in. But making sure that we're paying attention to where students are on this continuum. We certainly want them to be actively involved and not on the passive or the disengaged side. We will continue to support our staff throughout these 6 weeks, knowing that everything that they need can't be delivered to them in this short period of time as they prepare, but that they know that we're there by their side. So reminding them to stay grounded in those best teaching practices that they know and they're already practicing, making sure that they're engaged in professional learning opportunities that will be provided to them every week. And then we've created a virtual learning playbook that provides them with additional guidance and that we continue to build upon. I believe you have a copy of that, board members. Helping students, families, and staff understand the digital tools that we will use as far as Canvas, Google Meets, as well as digital curriculum curation. Understanding that our staff are supported by, just like our families, tiers of support. So we have partners in tech, which are teacher leaders in the building that are able to support each other. Technology assistants who will be accessible to students and families, as well as staff in supporting them in this virtual transition. Certainly curriculum instruction and technology will be a part of the support system. And then just reminding our staff to lean in and lean on each other, as well as all of us. We've been focused on this continuous improvement in growth to be able to be successful in the digital and virtual learning environment. We have our teaching staff who have achieved over 250 technology certifications in order to prepare for this learning environment. We have increased our professional learning time and our professional learning community time to dedicate to supporting them and continuing and growing. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Michaelis to talk about exceptional learners and preschool.
Alrighty. Well, hello, Mr. Barker, President Curry, members of the board, and guests. I just have a few slides because everything we do in preschool and everything we do in exceptional learners really dovetails right into what is planned for all students in School City of Mishawaka. So starting a little bit with exceptional learners, you know, we have a lot of legal obligations to meet for services, provisions, accommodations, and how they mesh with gen ed direct instruction that we are working on. They are in light of the current circumstances. Usually we would say the student circumstances, but now it's really circumstances relating to COVID. So we will make all of those decisions. I have great news to share though. Our young adult services housed at the Patel Center is going to school in person. So we have met with the park department, we have met with the teacher, the staff, the families. We had surveyed the young adult parents prior to the closure, and all but one student really wanted their child to come back. It really is that bridge into adulthood. We had 3 students graduate last year who are in Mishawaka, who are gainfully employed. One of them has his own apartment. So it's really, we really feel it's important with our services in transition to adulthood that they be able to come. We're able to social distance, we're able to disinfect, follow all the CDC guidelines, so we're very, very excited to have that happen next week. Another program we will be providing live in-person services to is the Oakland campus program. Those kids are residentially placed. They have a quarantine procedure and protocol that they follow when a new student comes into the facility. All of their screening, the kids travel and live in pods. They live there, so a little bit different than living in a home where you might have guests come in. There are no guests at campus. They do testing of their students and their staff members on a daily basis and health checks. So they will also be starting in person next Wednesday. So we're also very excited about that. We've also decided that we are going to offer in-person therapies or virtual therapy. So if your student has speech and language therapy, occupational or physical therapy, you will have a choice through that case conference procedure to determine whether or not you would like to bring your child into school for those services. Again, following all of our road reopening plan to make sure that we're social distancing and keeping everybody safe. Looking at, I can't really say a whole lot about the exceptional learners specifics because that is done through the case conference. So you would sit down as a team of people and determine what is best for that specific student. We have a lot of program assistants who will be helping support our child care option for our staff members, along with supporting our teachers to provide those virtual learning opportunities to our students. And all of that support staff would be under the direct supervision of a teacher. So in a nutshell, that's what we're planning for exceptional learners. And Growing Together Preschool, boy, we have struggled with this one. This is a permissive tuition-paid program, and we went back and forth. Do we, don't we, do we, don't we? What kind of a virtual option should we offer? So we had a meeting yesterday and finally decided we are going to offer virtual. We're going to give it a try this summer. Ms. Hickle talked about the virtual summer school. We were actually the only local school corporation that worked with United Way to offer virtual kindergarten warm-up camp. So very successful. So some of those littlest students that we have are coming in already with some exposure to virtual learning, which is great. So Janice White, our preschool director, who's a wonderful person and is always looking for opportunities to make our program better, applied for and was able to receive an Early Learning Indiana Come Back Stronger Fund grant. So it was based on your enrollment in March before the school closure. So she was able to secure $20,000 for the Beager site and $10,000 for LaSalle. And what that money can be used for are reopening things. So in between sessions, there's not enough time to disinfect toys. So we would have to buy storage totes and duplicate toys, so we box one till we can go ahead and disinfect individual school boxes, all of the preschool supplies, Play-Doh and everything for them to use. So we have already spent some of that money, so pretty excited to go over there and see what's going to happen in preschool. We will also, we have about 85 students registered right now, which is lower than our typical 140 by the end of the school year, which we kind of anticipated. So we are contacting, starting tomorrow, all of the registered family, offering them the virtual learning opportunity at half-price tuition. So whatever your price is, depending on the number of days you go and the length of your day, your charge will be half. And if you choose not to do virtual, you're not comfortable, or due to childcare or whatever, you can't do it, we will go ahead and then apply their tuition for when we open and reopen in person. Students with disabilities in preschool, we have a legal obligation to provide their services, so we will do that virtually. And through preschool, we will follow all the SCM Road to Reopening guidelines. So I'm pretty excited. You know, I'll actually get to see some of those kids in person, a few of them, where we can run those programs that are so important. And our staff also, you know, it's a scary time because we build the big gen ed model, and then now we need to dive a little bit deeper about, okay, how does all of those specialized services fit into the bigger picture? So lots of individual conversations with teachers and staff members. And our last slide, I believe, says thank you. It does. So thank you. So if anybody has questions.
Are there any questions for Mrs. Michaels or Mrs. Hickle?
Now, when you say you're going to offer virtual services for those that have disabilities, some of the disabilities are pretty severe, and I mean, they're basically cared for when they come to school. How would you do that virtually?
Well, what we have to look at is what is the cause of that high level of service at school. And a lot of it is barriers, getting around in the building, mobility, having support in an elective art class at Mishawaka High School. So some of those opportunities aren't going to be available during virtual learning, but we'll have to meet knowing full well that we will have to work with families to figure out. I had a parent email today that wanted to know if a program assistant was just going to go to their house all day, because her student received a lot of services. So, you know, my instant reaction is kind of to chuckle, but really you think these parents are really concerned about what are they going to do with their students. So we'll look at goals and look at how we would like the kid to progress, and then that's how you determine the level of service. We did a really nice job in the spring offering speech virtually. Our special ed teachers got on as teams with the occupational therapist, and they met with parents and their students. So it worked out pretty well. It worked out better than what I had hoped, actually. So, and what Ms. Hickle said is that, you know, we're going to have more rigorous expectations for the fall and really look at that rigor, but we have at least a grounding from the spring. So thanks, that was a very good question.
I guess this is for Sarah. Are there any classes at the high school that are more difficult or challenging to have virtual?
There certainly are, and I'm sure those teachers are.
And how are we handling that?
So especially a lot of our hands-on classes, you think about industrial technology, lab-based classes, art classes, fine arts classes. We're working with each of our teachers to look at what that can and will look like. Luckily, there are a lot of resources that Indiana Department of Education has pushed out, recognizing that a lot of schools were in this situation in the spring and continue to be in this situation. Many of our teachers are looking at their curriculum and evaluating whether or not they should resequence things to move up some instructional pieces and free up more time later in the year in hopes that we will be back in person. With our CTE funding, there are course requirements. Some of them require a 50% at a minimum in-person instruction. Some of them require an 80% in-person instruction. So we have contingency plans that, if it's beyond the 6 weeks, then how do we look at doing some of the things like we're doing with our adult ed program, or, finding ways to bring students in smaller groups. Luckily, John Ross is a very creative, innovative man. He's thinking through all scenarios. We've been working closely with those teachers to think about what those courses will look like. You think about a course like Mr. Rendell's course, where they're using equipment and they're producing materials, and thinking about how they can do that in a virtual setting, what can be done virtually versus which ones cannot. And the teachers are working through that process and adjusting their curriculum maps.
But how about like a chemistry lab where the student has to, hands-on, be involved?
So a lot of their lab standards are a component of two different things. One, the ability to demonstrate, which is I think probably what you're speaking to, which is incredibly challenging. And those are some of the skills that they're thinking about resequencing. Whereas some of the lab standards aren't so much demonstrate, they're be able to apply. And so the teachers are asking when the typically application would take place in the lab. They're looking for other ways that students could demonstrate the application. You think about something like engineering and technology. They're thinking of ways they're working with things like AutoCAD that previously wasn't accessible on a Chromebook. And how do we make sure that students have the tools available to them at home that they still have in our buildings? So working through those. Much of that, unfortunately, is done at a course-by-course level to figure out how to best do that. And their gears have been turning since, early summer as far as what would that look like, what could that look like, and so building out those contingency plans.
But are we in for those types of courses, I've got to believe that we're somewhat limited, and the student is really not getting full experience that he should get.
Certainly it does restrict that, and so I think that's why they're trying to think of ways to resequence so that experience isn't lost in hopes that we can come back. But they're also thinking about how do we get materials to the students that would allow that. So I think about Mr. Buckman during remote learning, who sat in the Mishawaka parking lot to give out clay so that his ceramics students could still do ceramics. I think about industrial technology again, and they created some kits so that things that would normally be done in a lab space, all students had access to those same materials. So they're trying not to lose those components. Some of those things are easier to contain and to replicate than others, and they're working through those things with a lot of support from their department heads, from their peers. But you're exactly right, and those are the questions they're asking themselves. We really felt that it was important, the high school administration and the curriculum instruction department, that we didn't immediately start restricting course offerings with that in mind, which is what some schools have done, is to take certain courses and say we're not going to offer those courses because of a virtual setting. And we didn't want to do that, thinking about students' pathway completion and thinking about those experiences that become prerequisites for further courses that could mess up their course sequencing in the long term. So we've really felt like it was best to explore the other pathway, which is how do you maintain as much of that as possible. And it requires, honestly, a lot of creativity and innovation.
How are we approaching extracurricular activities and experiences?
So at this point in time, much in the way that we are athletics, if they can be held outside and they can be done in a socially distanced fashion, they're anticipating working through plans in the same way. As we move into different seasons, we'll have to look at that differently and what that may look like. At this point in time, we're still intending to follow the same recommendations that we've been using for athletics, that will continue to support extracurriculars.
Thank you.
For families that mom and dad both have to go into the office per se, and so they would need to seek out the virtual self-paced option, how would they go about doing that?
That's a great question, Amanda. We have included in our communication, and then the communication that will come out from teachers specifically will focus on helping parents to orient to the process, so providing some personalized time where they can answer questions. That's my phone doing that. I apologize. And in those conversations, once they've been able to hear what the parents and students' needs are and best direct them, if they decide that they just don't think they can be successful in that live setting, then they'll be able to elect to be supported in a self-directed model. And much in the way that the students will access those materials in a live setting via Canvas, those materials will be recorded. They'll be produced so that they're accessible at other hours for those students. The main component that's lost, and that is just the ability to be there in person to support them, but they'll still do that through communication, the ability to answer questions. It is really important that if they do elect to have a self-paced or self-directed model, that they still are getting the same experience and keeping on pace with their peers.
What about Career Center? Is that, since Elkhart is going back to a hybrid schedule, is Career Center opted for us still, or no?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead. I was going to say the same thing you are.
So we're planning to send those students. The recommendation from Dr. Fox was that it was the recommendation for e-learning, but then there was also, or a severely limited in-person model. So that's how we're doing that with the young adult program, Oakland, and we can do the same with the Elkhart Area Career Center. So we're working that out. I know Mr. Newman and I had a conversation today. I think it was Mr. Newman and I about transportation of those students and trying to determine with Mr. Calderoni who those students are and do they still want to go? Do they still want that schedule? And if so, getting our transportation worked out into the schedule that they're providing, which is, and Elkhart is a 2 days in, next week 3 days in model. So we would work that out with our own transportation system to provide that for them.
And what about building trades?
That's what I was just thinking when you're talking about the Career Center. Much in the same way with adult education and with the Career Center, we feel that the size of that course, as well as the students' ability to elect if they want to continue an in-person model. I know Ben Modlin and the board have been working with the students to help to identify if that's something that they want to pursue so that we could continue that is one of those experiences that would be awfully hard to recreate virtually.
And as far as the K-8 daycare, and I use that very lightly because I know it's 12 through 8, but, or K through 8. So each school will have a K through 8 area where those kids can e-learn while the teachers are in their classroom.
Correct.
Whether they're students of Mishawaka or any other school district.
Exactly.
Come to school.
So based on the number of staff members that needed that, we were able to staff one at every building so that they can be in the building where their parents are. And even based on those numbers, we're able to group them by age groups that might be a little bit more appropriate. And then dedicating the staff to be there to support them, but also asking the parents to provide the information as far as, what are the expectations for their virtual learning, what communication is coming from their teachers, what are their expectations for when they're not doing virtual learning, and helping to make sure that we're able to support those students during the day when their parents are working.
The child care you reference is for staff members only, children of staff members only. And that's so that we can support the virtual learning that we're trying to do by requiring our employees to come in. Having said that, we're also working with some community partners to find resources to be able to support our community with other additional resources for them for possible child care, e-learning centers, or virtual learning centers. We're None of that is finalized yet, but we're hopeful to have a plan that we can bring forward here in the next couple days to provide also some options for some of our families.
I think that's a great idea, and I think it can only help. It can only help. So I look forward to those partnerships. That'll be great.
One thing.
Suggestion. Since labs are not available in some of these courses, if that lab is required in a course that they're taking to get a college credit, and they don't receive the college credit for it, they should be notified that they're not going to get a college credit for that before they go in and take the course, rather than after.
Well, hopefully with the redoing of the instruction and doing more of the informational stuff first and the labs last, the plan here is to go back to school in 6 weeks, is hopefully all of our plan, and the St. Joe County Health Department. So, Mr. Fox, that was for you. That is the hope, that in 6 weeks we're back in our school and things go back to normal, right? And so they'll redirect how that works so that those college kids get those credits.
And so those percentages that I was speaking to for the requirements for in-person instruction were for CT courses, but Jeff, you bring up a good point. Much in that same way, we're working with our secondary partners to make sure that we are still meeting their expectations. Luckily, many of them have been in a virtual situation, continue to be in virtual situations, so they've offered a lot more flexibility, I would say, than CTE courses do. But the transparency to kids to make sure that they understand, how that functions and what the implications of that are. You're exactly right. I just wanted to mention also with child care for our families, our building principals have been working to try and determine our most popularly used, our elementary principals, I should say, our most popularly used child care centers in the community so that we can reach out to them as partners so that they can better understand what those virtual learning expectations are and so that they are able to support our students in that environment. So we're trying to do our best to collaborate with anyone who may be out there supporting our students, knowing that together is how we're going to ensure their success.
Well, I feel encouraged. I feel encouraged as a parent and as a school board member. I feel encouraged that you have put together. Sorry, Matt. He's giving me the eyeball down there. That you've put together a schedule or at least a path for all of us. I was starting to worry today because I got an email and I was like, now what? So I pick up some devices at John Young and this is all I have. So I feel like once this goes out tomorrow, hopefully, it's going to curb a lot of the questions. And I think as soon as that parents can engage with a teacher or a staff member, it's going to take away even more questions. So I appreciate all the hard work of you and your staff. And I think that this 6 weeks will come easier than we're expecting in hopes that it only lasts for 6 weeks. So good job.
Completely agree. Thank you.
We completely agree that an in-person model is best for kids. None of us, that's what we want. We much prefer to be in that model. But I will say, as a result of this, one of the silver linings for this will be we will have a much improved blended learning model than we ever would have had this not happened. I still wish this had not happened. I still wish we had been working toward implementing e-learning for inclement weather, which was a goal. And now we're at the end of this 6 weeks specifically, we will be way beyond that with our skill level of our teaching staff, and then also our community. But it won't come without growing pains. But we want our community to know that we're here for them. We'll meet them where they are, and we'll try to support them wherever they are, so that their child can be successful. And it will look different from home to home. It will look different from class to class. But the thing that we're trying to get everyone to understand is it doesn't have to be perfect on August 12th. We need to meet people where they are and try to improve from there. That's the entire continuous improvement model, and that's the expectation we have for our staff and the same that we have for our students, that we'll continue to extend grace to them and move them forward and allow them the best chance to be successful.
I wonder if this might also in the future, and I'm thinking out, give us an opportunity to expand the service that we provide the community and look at virtual learning opportunities to supplement our normal in-class opportunities that we have. I mean, after this is over with.
I think without a doubt it will.
Okay.
I think had students that we didn't necessarily meet their needs. They had a more virtual learning style, and we didn't offer as much of that. You know, I talked to a parent the other day who has students elsewhere. He lives elsewhere. But he said in the spring he found out that his children, who were both good students, but one did not do well in a virtual environment. And he found out that he needed to help her improve in that area because when she moves on to college and things, she'll be more exposed to that. But then he also found out that a child who didn't do nearly as well or close to as well as the other child did much better in a virtual learning environment. And I think we have an obligation to provide both. And I think you're absolutely right. We will be able to meet more needs when this is over down the road than we could have without this.
And I agree with that, but at the same time, there are a number of, for whatever reason, are being homeschooled. And there may be an opportunity here where we can pull some of them back in.
Absolutely.
Through a virtual environment.
Mr. Ross and I had conversations last year about that very thing. How can we pull students who are choosing these virtual academies that are across the state,
yes,
where they connect with teachers who are in Indianapolis or in Evansville? How can we learn to do that ourselves here? And without a doubt, this will help us to be able to do that.
Well, I think Ivy Tech is doing the same thing. So, I mean, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all of that discussion. I really appreciate how engaged you are. You've asked excellent questions. And so tonight, based upon all of those presentations, we're asking you to approve the reopening plan update number 4 as we continue to move forward. So that's the recommendation tonight.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation for reopening plan update number 4. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Well, I continue to be impressed by the level of detail that you've put into this. This demonstrates an immense amount of hard work, and I know you've had to turn on a dime, you know, to put these things together several times, and it's truly impressive. It gives us a great deal of confidence in the services we're able to provide. Thank you. This takes us into our reports and discussion items section of the agenda. Item 6.01, updates to the School City of Mishawaka Parent-Student Handbook. Mr. Calderon.
Thank you, President Curry, school board members, and Superintendent Barker. Just want to take a few minutes tonight to kind of take you through some changes and a few updates that we made to the 2020 21 student handbook. As you recall from last year, our handbook looked similar to this, or this was the handbook from last year. And one of my responsibilities was to make sure that gets updated for this upcoming school year. So I want to say, first of all, I appreciate the collaboration with some of our school leaders at the elementary and middle school and high school level who participated in help in assisting me in doing some of these in performing some of these updates for this year's model. Obviously, one important part of the parent-student handbook, it was the new code of conduct that I presented a couple months ago at a board meeting. I really think that's going to be an asset to us because it clearly sets expectations for our entire school community, which includes our teachers and staff members, which also includes our parents and guardians, our volunteers and community members. From my experience in running a high school for 10 years and be involved in school administration, the more we can clarify those expectations for our people, I think the better they are followed and the more we can accomplish. So hopefully that code of conduct will have an impact on our school year once we get rolling. Some of the minor changes, I'm not going to go through each one of these that I have listed, but there's been an ongoing problem with kids wearing hoodie sweatshirts, which is fine, but then they want to wear their hoods. So we've kind of made that clear in this new parent-student handbook. Student devices for students K-12, that's going to be new. So we thought that would be important to be part of this. Textbook and supply fees, immunizations, and then just the update of our School City Mishawaka leadership team, which includes school board members, to central office administration, to our leaders at our building levels. And we added 4 new leadership positions this past year with the assistant principals that are at 4 of our elementary buildings, so they'll be included as well. We'll get these out once we receive them. We'll make sure you get a copy of them, copy of one for your own usage, and that'll be our 2020-21 parent-student handbook, and like I said, we'll get that to you as soon as possible. Any questions at all?
It's not.
Okay, thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the work you put into this. I know this is a major undertaking. That takes us to item 6.02, the June financial statements and monthly comparison. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Curry, members of the board. Bruce, can we pull up that first document that's labeled 6/30/20? Click on that, and then click that first one. Thank you. So starting with the education fund, again, these are our major fund balances through the end of June 2020. So starting with the education fund, up at the top there, state tuition support, 48.9%. We're right in line with where we built that budget. Student fees, we've actually collected some additional student fees. Interest on investments, again, that's trending higher than what we had budgeted. Other miscellaneous is coming a little bit higher. But overall, total revenue in the education fund at 49% of what we budgeted. We're pretty much right where we expected to be. The next section down below, salaries and wages being right at 50% at the end of June. A little bit higher than what I would have thought right there, but nothing major. Pretty much right in line with where we would expect. Same with benefits. The other categories there, professional services, property services, purchase services, and mainly supplies. As I compare those to the previous few years, we are actually saving some money in there, which makes sense since we broke at the end of March. Certainly in the supply category, we didn't have to purchase as many student supplies. Again, this is the education fund, so we're only talking about instructional type items here, building level supplies. But overall, total expenditures just under 48% of what we budgeted. So again, both our revenue and our expenditures are pretty much in line with where we would expect to be. I do want to point out, as I pointed out for the month of May, we did take advantage of some of the changes with the IRS and related to COVID, and one of those being that we can withhold Social Security or Social Security payments to the IRS. 50%, we have to repay 50% at the end of the calendar year and the other 50% a year later. So actually, the fund balance is overstated by about, at the end of June, I believe it was about $250,000 from withholding those dollar amounts. And the reason for doing those, we withhold them, keep them in our bank account, we can earn interest on them, pay them later. It's a simple thing to do and generate a little bit of additional money. But by and large, the education fund, again, looks good, right where we would expect it to be. The next fund there, Bruce, the Referendum operating fund. I want to point out on that top line, local property taxes. So we get our local property tax distribution in 2 payments, end of June, end of December. So at the end of June, we were sitting right under 50% of collections, which is where we would expect it to be in this fund. This fund is exempt from the circuit breaker, so you should collect 100% or close to it of your levy each year. Other taxes, Usually our June distribution is larger than our December distribution, so again, pretty much in line with where we would expect it to be in terms of the revenue. Salaries in this fund are trending a little bit higher, and that's mainly due to the fact that our tech assistants worked the majority of the summer. Typically they go home. We do have them work a little bit over the summer for summer school and other things, but with all the devices and all those things coming in, we continued to pay them through the end of June. And I think once we look at July, we'll notice that percentage is even a little bit higher, again, as they continue to work. But by and large, the referendum operating fund looks very good. We've collected $370,000 more in revenue than we've paid out in expenditures. Again, that kind of evens out at the end of the year when we make that transfer of $400,000 to the rainy day fund. But again, by and large, this fund, where we would expect it to be, and actually because our AV grew, we'll actually generate more in property tax revenue in 2020 than we have the past few years. So again, happy with where that fund is at this time. The debt service fund, the next fund there, Bruce. So that top line item, local property taxes, you'll see that we collected about 39.6%. Debt service is protected. It's not exempt from the circuit breaker, but it's a protected fund. So what you would usually see is that percentage of collection would be right around the 45 to 50% range. However, we're taking advantage of the waiver from protected taxes. And if you recall, we've done this the past several years. However, it's a much larger number in 2020 than it has been in previous years because the circuit breaker amount is so much larger for us. So what protected taxes do is essentially say that you're going to lose X in circuit breaker, X amount of your levy to the circuit breaker, and because we want to protect your debt service fund, your debt service is protected. But schools can apply for a waiver from that protected taxes, which allows you to essentially utilize your cash balance in your debt service fund to move dollars from debt service over into the operations fund. So we took advantage of that again this year. It's actually going to generate, or actually I transferred $517,000 from debt service to operations because we're taking advantage of that waiver. Which is fantastic. However, it's really the last year that we can do that. So again, you're depleting the cash balance in your debt service fund every year that you do that, and eventually you can't do it anymore. So this will be the last year we can take advantage of that. However, it makes perfect sense to do so. There's no reason to have an excessive cash balance in your debt service fund so long as you can make your debt payments. But that is why the local property tax percentage is so low in the debt service, because we transferred that amount. It would be right in the 50% range if you added that 517 back in. Expenditures in this fund, right in line with the amortization schedules previously approved by the board, and we're right at 50% expended. So next fund, Bruce, is our referendum capital debt service fund. Again, this is a referendum fund, so it is exempt from the circuit breaker, so local property tax collections should be right at 50%, which they were. Other taxes, again, right where we would expect them to be. Expenditures, we've paid 50% exactly on that amortization schedule. Again, this is the referendum bonds passed in 16, bonds sold in 17, but again, fund balance $650,975. However, there's temporary loan in there as well. But again, right where we would expect this fund to be. Next fund, Bruce. This is our operations fund. So again, top line, local property tax, you'll see that it's showing 36.24%, but that's including the $517,000 that we transferred from debt service. So if you take that out, we're sitting right about 21%, which is right in line with where we would expect it to be, because we're losing roughly 59% of our local property tax levy. That 3.3 million gets lost to the circuit breaker. So absent the waiver from protected taxes, you would expect your collection percentage to be right around 21%, which it was. Other taxes, again, in line with where we would expect them. We do see some other miscellaneous revenue in this fund, but it's really a very small amount. And then, of course, we have the transfers from the education fund. We continue to transfer $8 million annually divided over 12 months. So there's the revenue in that fund. And then you have our expenditures, again, salaries, benefits, right in line with where we would expect them to be. And then again, our major savings, at least in this fund, supplies, the additional supply costs that we've incurred due to COVID have not gone to the operations fund. We've got an opportunity to apply for a FEMA grant, so I've been putting those expenditures in the FEMA grant funding or in the CARES Act funding. So we've actually saved money on supplies and utilities for being because we were out of school after March. So again, expenditures right around 46%. If you go down just a little bit, Bruce, so we can see that last line item, right now we have a cash balance of just over $3 million, which is really, again, ahead of where we would have expected it to be. However, going back to the waiver from protected taxes, that's why that balance has grown. And again, this will be the last year that we can take advantage of that. Next fund. School lunch fund. School lunch fund, I think, is the most interesting to talk about, at least in relation to COVID, because it's the fund that's most impacted, at least on paper right now. So as I compared where we were at June 30, 2020 to 2019, student and adult meals, the top two lines in revenue, we're down about $170,000 in revenue. Makes sense. We weren't in school. No students were purchasing meals. No adults were purchasing meals. But our federal reimbursement is also down about $100,000 through June. So between the two of those, roughly $270,000 in lost revenue. And then if you come down to the expenditure side, salaries were actually up about $64,000. About 50% of that is just simply due to having increased pay. But it also, we operated food service over the week of spring break, which was unusual, drove up those costs, and then we had that pandemic pay. So that all boils down to having salaries increase by about $64,000. But on the flip side, our food and supply costs are down about $112,000. So we're approximately $200,000 worse off in the food service fund than we would have been had we finished the school year as normal. We've actually added to the balance since January 1, but we've decreased about $34,000 compared to June 2019. Cash balance of $782,000. However, once again, had COVID not hit, that cash balance would probably be close to $1 million. So just wanted to point those out. I did also want to mention, and I think I mentioned when we went over May that there was some timing issues in terms of getting reimbursement. However, in the month of June, we did get April, we did get May, so we're essentially caught back up in terms of being reimbursed by the federal government compared to where we would typically be. So again, we're breaking even in this fund. However, unfortunately, we would typically have built up a $200,000 balance on top of that. Curricular materials fund, not much to talk about here. We did pay, I knew what it was earlier, but we paid quite a large bill in June. It was the second payment of the HMH. So we paid a $260,000-ish bill, which brought the cash balance down compared to May. Again, however, quite the healthy balance in our textbook rental fund, or our curricular materials fund, and that's going to help us to pay for some additional curriculum and other things that we have lined up moving forward. So very happy with the curricular materials fund. So, and then finally is the self-insurance fund. We did have some higher claims in the month of June, which we expected that be in I guess it was the second month or so that people could go back in, and so we thought our claims were down for about three months, and we knew that they were going to go back up, and they did in June. We had medical claims of about $612,000. So cash balance went down $104,000 in this fund in the month of June. However, we're still up just under $200,000 since January, and if I go back to June 30 of 2019, we're pretty much breaking even. So we're keeping this fund in the black, and again, it's certainly improved over the past several years. So, and then finally, Bruce, if you could go to that final, it's the other document, the monthly comparison. And this one looks really good. Just scroll down just a little bit. You can see that the net between our education fund and our operations fund is about $7.4 million compared to last year, which it was about 5.6. Now again, those Social Security payments are part of that, and obviously that waiver from protected taxes. But again, we're continuing to build the balances of those funds up. However, if I take the Social Security monies out and that waiver from protected taxes, so what would be a typical year, let's just imagine it was next year, we're about breaking even in those two funds. So,
Alex, do you anticipate transferring any money yet this year into the insurance fund?
You never know the way claims may trend, but it's my hope that we will not, that we will end the calendar year in the black. I don't know if we'll end with close to $300,000 in that fund.
But might it be wise to put some in there to get that balance up?
Sure.
So that we can get it to rise each year?
Yeah, I mean,
we really need to be in excess of $1 million in that fund.
Yeah. Again, we could do that. Do you want your self-insurance fund to be higher, or you want your education fund and your operations fund? So you're picking one or the other. Right. Because if we transfer more, we're obviously depleting the other fund balance. But I do think we'll keep it in the black. The one thing we also have to keep in mind on the risk share is we're currently owing on the risk share. So for between the first 2 years, I believe we owe about $110,000 to Select, and we're on pace to owe them, I believe, another $150,000 based on claims this year. So we may have to transfer some money into it in order to make that payment, which I believe would be due March of 2021. So that's certainly in the back of my mind as well.
Where are we at with the rebates?
Rebates are really good. They've been going up every year. I don't have that in front of me, but we're seeing about $145,000 quarterly. So those have really started to roll in. But those are the financials through the end of June. Again, it's mostly positive, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Very good.
Any questions for Alex?
You're here.
So are we. All right. Then we'll move on to 7.01, Personnel Report. Mr. Calderon.
President Curry, board members, it is recommended that the personnel report dated August 5th, 2020 be approved as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, accept the report as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.01, recommendation to approve change order with R. Yoder Construction. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Curry and members of the board. At the April 10th, 2018 board meeting, R. Yoder was awarded the door and door hardware project in the amount of $2,145,300. This evening, the administration is seeking approval of a change order request in the amount of $54,214. If you want to see all the detail that it entails, I have it, but I'm not going to go through each line item. The change order request includes a great number of doors and or door hardware that was not included in the original bid, and that is essentially what all these change orders were. So we took a project to bid, and then once our Yoder ordered the materials, we started to do the construction, the installation. Hey, we're missing this door, we're missing this hardware, and so that's what these change orders are. So they're at our request, and essentially they're all additional equipment, additional supplies, and then the labor to install them. That's what all these change orders are. So basically, we are getting something for these change orders. It's additional things that, again, we're getting. And they are necessary to complete the project, and funds are available from the 2018 first mortgage bond sale to cover the increased cost. I know Mr. Strawn asked a series of questions. I'll try to answer them. The first question was, why isn't the source of funds in the proposed change order part of the $13 million from the 2016, what I refer to as the 2017 bonds? If you recall, when we by the time we got to doing the door and door hardware project, we had already done a number of other projects from the 2017, the referendum bond funds, and there wasn't enough money remaining in the 2017 bond to cover that project. So that's why part of the 2018 bond sale was to make up the difference in the door-to-door hardware project. So that's why it would come out of that fund. Was there a contingency dollar reserve in the Yoder contract? And if so, what was the dollar amount? There was, but it was only $85,000. And in retrospect, we should have included a 10% and not had all these change orders. But it was $85,000. We blew through the allowance fairly quickly, and then you got all these change orders now. So then question 3, talking about the various sums of money, and if Yoder had initially bid, what's now the total. Again, it's important to remember that the two vendors who bid on that project bid on an apples-to-apples project. So again, all these change orders weren't part of the original bid, and therefore they weren't part of what the other vendor was bidding on either. So it was an apples-to-apples comparison at the time. When this requirement was solicited, a pre-bid meeting was mandatory as a condition for submitting the bid. How many entities attended the pre-bid meeting, and how many of those actually submitted a bid? I don't know how many attended the pre-bid meeting, but I am quite confident it was only 2 vendors who bid on the project. And then again, going to your question 5, about the site conditions and the large number of change orders. Again, it's not on Yoder. It was more on the architect engineer who assisted us with that project and the number of items that they missed. And in my opinion, we're fortunate that Yoder stuck with us through this process to get all these things fixed, because it certainly wasn't part of the original bid, and quite frankly, they didn't have to. So again, I hope that answers all your questions, Mr. Strong. But again, back to the agenda item, we're looking for approval of change order number 8 in the amount of $54,214. I'm quite confident that this is the final and last change order for this project, as it is substantially complete.
Move for approval.
Second, and I'm not happy about it. I think is Schmidt on the hook for anything?
Schmidt, we've had a number of discussions with Schmidt. They are, number one, they did pay directly for, I believe, 2 different items that were incorrect. They paid the contractor directly. And then we've been in discussions with them. There is going to be some monetary amount coming back to the school corporation to reimburse us for the inconvenience. And then also the additional, I guess, the overhead or the administrative expense that went along with each change. So each change order had a certain percentage add-on from Yoder. Schmidt is covering that percentage add-on. So we'll get some money back from them due to these issues. And they've been great to work with. I mean, I do want to point that out. There was issues with it, but they have dealt with those issues. They have been with us through that, and they've been willing to make it right. So I would think it's important to point that out as well.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation to accept change order number 8. Is there any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Newman. Item 9.02, recommendation to approve service agreement with Transpo. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Curry and members of the board. This agenda item actually really goes back to early January, and at that time, South Bend Public Transportation Corporation, also known as Transpo, reached out to the school corporation, and they wanted to discuss the cost of providing the school tripper service in future years. And so just so everybody knows, obviously Transpo runs their normal route schedule. They also run additional routes specifically for School City of Mishawaka. It's really 3 routes, although it kind of looks like 4 because there's a transfer on the 1 route. But it's really 3 routes that they run for us in the mornings and in the afternoons. And that's what we refer to as the school tripper service. So it's routes specifically for School City of Mishawaka. At the time of that meeting, School City was paying approximately $10,000 per year for the school tripper routes to operate 180 school days. Students at John Young and Mishawaka High School were then also charged to ride those routes, which generated roughly $15,000 annually for Transpo. So combined between what our students and our families were paying and what we were paying, Transpo was collecting about $25,000 a year, and they estimated the cost to run those routes at about $185,000 a year. So we were getting quite the deal on those routes. And unfortunately, due to Transpo's budget constraints, which are similar to ours and related to the circuit breaker, they were no longer going to be able to do that. And when they met with us in January, essentially what they proposed was our moving to paying full cost starting with the 2020-2021 school year. We shared with them that that was just really very difficult for the school corporation to absorb an increase of $160,000, $170,000 in a single year. They've been great to work with. I do want to point that out. And over the course of several discussions, it was proposed that we would do this over a phase-in. And so they came back and their first offer was, okay, how about $500 a day for the 2020-21 school year, and then we'll move to $1,000 the following year. And we sort of countered with what is basically in the agreement now, which is that we would pay them $425 per service day for the 2020-2021 school year. The following year, we would pay $825, and then in that third year, it would go up to the $1,000 per day or whatever the total cost of the service is at that time. One additional benefit is that under this newly proposed fee structure, all John Young and all Mishawaka students with a valid school ID will be able to ride any existing Transpo route, the school tripper routes, any day of the week, any time, without limitations, weekends, evenings, holidays, etc. I also want to point out both parties reserve the right to terminate this agreement within 30 days, and it is Transpo's desire to take another look at their routes when they go through. I think every so many years somebody comes in, evaluates the routes. It's possible that they redo the routing structure over here in Mishawaka so that what are basically these school tripper routes now become normal routes. Maybe not all of them, maybe not any of them, but that is something they're going to look at. If that happens, that will greatly reduce the cost to the school corporation. One thing that we've already looked at and will continue to look at is the possibility of us doing it ourselves, because once we get to that third year and we're paying $180,000, you're getting pretty close to our ability to potentially purchase a couple buses and provide that. Again, I'm not going to say that we could, but it's at least a possibility. So my hope is that we never get to paying $1,000 per service day in 2022-23, and that's Transpo's hope
Alex,
as well.
you know, I spent 21 years on the Transpo board, and ADM for us, the equivalent for them is ridership numbers. So with the negotiations that have been going on, giving access to their buses for our students anywhere all the time enhances their ridership, which means federal dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we need to keep that in mind also when we're negotiating.
So will our students still be paying the $30 a month to ride?
No.
Okay.
No.
And that means the general public may also be on the bus with the students if they open that up?
The general public can ride the school tripper routes right now.
Oh, really?
They by and large choose not to. But legally, they have to allow them on those routes if they so chose to ride them now.
Yeah. As soon as you see that bus and all those, and you're like, nope, I'll take the next one.
Right.
Okay. But no more $30 bus pass.
Nope. As long as that student has their ID with them, they should be able to board the bus and ride it as often as they would like.
Okay.
So again, happy to answer any other questions, but we are seeking approval of this 3-year agreement with Transpo for 2020 through the 2023 school year.
Move for approval. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation to approve the 3-year service agreement. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And thank you for negotiating the phase-in. Still up. Item 9.03, recommendation to approve the 2019 annual financial report. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. This is an annual report that we publish every year. Indiana Code 5-3-1-3 requires the secretary of each public school corporation to publish an annual financial report. The report must be published one time annually between August 1st and 15th of each year. The annual report details receipts, expenditures, enrollment, assessed valuation, tax rates, vendor history, in addition to our outstanding debt. If approved this evening, this annual financial report should run August 8th in the South Bend Tribune. And again, I'm seeking approval of the 2019 annual financial report.
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.04, recommendation to approve Mishawaka High School courtyard landscaping quotes. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. In order to put the finishing touches on the Mishawaka High School traffic safety project, the school corporation has sought quotes for additional landscaping in the front courtyard of Mishawaka High School. Initially, this work was to be delayed until roughly next spring. However, when new sidewalks were approved as an alternate as part of the traffic safety project, it just made sense to demo the current landscaping at that time. Otherwise, we would have put in new sidewalks, and then later on somebody would have been coming through with a bobcat to drive over those sidewalks to do the demo of the landscaping. So we had HRP demo the landscaping when they had the sidewalks demoed. However, we decided to get quotes on the landscaping in an effort to save some dollars. That was those quotes were due this morning at 10 a.m. Mr. Faulkner, Mr. Kallenbach, and I, in addition to Abbenmarsh, went through the quotes. They came in very favorable. We received two quotes, one from Acorn. It was just under $22,000, and then the Furbringer was the low quote at $13,397, and so we're seeking board approval of the low quote from Furbringer this evening. But I do want to point out that the majority of the cost to redo that courtyard is actually going to come as a change order with HRP Construction. And again, the school corporation has money available in the 2019 bond fund, but the majority of that cost will be paid for with donated monies that were donated, I believe, 4 years ago by Mrs. Rosie Claire for that specific purpose.
Why such the span between the two quotes? Why is it so much cheaper with, what did you call them?
Furbringer? Not quite sure. Acorn is actually the sub on the landscaping or on the traffic safety plan now, and so maybe they thought they were going to be the only ones to quote it. I'm not sure, but you're right. That is quite. But we did
so
save.
The trees are this tall instead of 4 foot tall.
No, it was an apples to apples quote, and Abbenmarsh went back through and all the documentation. It is apples to apples, and they were comfortable moving forward. And I believe they've worked, and I believe Mike's worked with them before, so we were comfortable.
Okay. Move for approval. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. All right. Thank you, Mr. Newman. This takes us into the leadership and policy section of the agenda, and these items 10.01, 10.02, and 10.03, based on the amendment of the agenda, have been changed from information items to action items. So after each one of these, there will be a vote taken. Thank you. Mrs. Pettit.
Good evening, School Board of Trustees. Please consider this the second reading for the Volume 31, Number 2, May 2019 new revised and replacement policies that were presented at the July 8th board meeting. And do you have any questions about them?
Move for approval. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendations on 10.01. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank
All right.
you.
Takes us to 10.02, second reading of June 2020 policy updates.
Please consider this the second reading for the Volume 32, Number 2, June 2020 new revised and replacement policies that were presented at the July 8th board meeting. Any questions?
Move for approval. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendations. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And finally, 10.03, second reading of new policy and replacement of current policy. Ms. Pettit.
Yes, just please consider this a second reading for the revised and new policies that were presented at the July 8th board meeting.
Move for approval?
Second?
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, board.
This takes us to the final section of the agenda, 11.01, public announcements. The first day of school for the 2020-2021 school year is on Wednesday, August 12th, 2020. And the next regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees will be held on September 9, 2020 at the Administrative Center, 1402 South Main Street, Mishawaka, Indiana. Is there any other business to come before the board?
I would like to say, I know that most of you know, and I would like for everyone to continue prayers, but the Bush family, I think it's important that we pay our prayers and thoughts and towards the family, you know, losing his dad and then the young man being in the critical condition that he is. I know that the fire department has done a lot for the family. They've done a meal train and all of that, so I think we should probably hold off on what we can do until she has come to say, or someone from the family is representing what we can do, just so that we're not overwhelming her in this segment. So if you could just continue to pray for the Bush family.
Thank you, Mrs. Parks.
Yes.
Is there anything else? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.